Hello and welcome to This Week I Tried, or TWIT for short. The premise is simple: I play games, record some footage of me playing said games, write a script about the game, then make a video multiple months later, if not longer. This week I tried World of Horror, or more, I have returned to it after a recent update, but that's besides the point. It's one of those games I got because streamers I like played it, but then I fell in love with it myself inevitably. Now, this game was developed by Panstasi, which most definitely is not pronounced how I think it is. That name probably means nothing to you, as it is their first game, at least on Steam, but what a game it is. I feel most people online are a tad bit too young, or at least video game world young, to know the kind of game this is based on. It is a combination of decision-based storytelling, roguelike mechanics, and turn-based combat. Although I doubt an interest in any single one of those things is enough to love this game. Instead, ideally what has attracted you to this game is the world of horror that is the works this game is based on. That of the ever-referenced Lovecraft, and that man behind those incredibly creepy manga for anyone who has even a passing interest in Cthulhu-esque modern horror has probably seen many times, that of Junji Ito, whose name I also probably mispronounced, if not for the fact I was reading it off a cue. The premise: your character has returned home to creepy stuff, people walking around aimlessly and depressed, weird noodle stores with amazing food, people purchasing supposedly used bathwater, rude doctors with questionable credentials disappearing off the face of the world, a crazy fish-obsessed neighbour who comes back for the first time in ages, alongside many other weird and wonderful happenings. These happenings come in two forms: events and cases. In terms of gameplay, cases are the 5 rounds you need to successfully complete to access the final phase of the game. On the other hand, events are random singular scenes you get while investigating on these cases. These events serve as the backbone to the roguelike aspect of this game, and because of this, vary massively. Some can be triggered by certain modifiers. For example, if you are poor, you get money events, where you get funds in exchange for doom, reason, or health. On the other hand, some are truly random, such as phone calls from telemarketers speaking of a coming doom, such as Dyson Hoovers and John Wick needing money by the end of the fortnight. Or you can get thrown into combat with a variety of creepy enemies which, depending on whether you remember to get a weapon, can be either game over terrible or free XP. As I've mentioned it, I might as well go into my experience with combat. Combat has been weird, and apologies if you're expecting something more analytical, but I'm not really sure how to describe it. Even when I build for combat, I find myself unable to win on some playthroughs, yet on others I feel like it's been a complete breeze, without even trying, which I guess is a symptom of RNG. Combat involves managing the cost of skills and the preparation for skills to ensure you are definitely hitting the opponent as hard as you can. There are other abilities such as the defensive or the ghost dispelling abilities, but the former feels pointless and the latter is convoluted enough that I normally just accept my fate if I have to deal with it. My only real tip is when the opportunity arises, go to the desert temple and get the katana. I have never lost with it as my weapon, I think. I mentioned before creepy enemies, and this relates to the art style. I avoid horror games, mind you, so perhaps this statement is not as true as I feel it is, but every aspect of this game's design is creepy. 1-bit or 2-bit art is inherently creepy to some extent, but the way it's used in this game to create the world, the maps, the objects, and especially the monsters is horrifying. Everything is grotesque and terrifying in their own ways. This reference might seem a bit out of nowhere, but bear with me as my horror game repertoire is far from large. In Dead Space 1, I think, there is a scene where you have to remove something from Isaac's eyeball. That has nothing on the eyeball seen in this game, and you don't even see the act in the game. There's another event where you just get lost in the city, and the bluntness of the text combined with the darker Fenta art makes it incomparably eerie, which brings us neatly onto the art style, which is this game's greatest selling point. Do not take this as harshly as I'm making it out to be, but the writing in this game is nothing when not placed alongside the incredibly overbearing art. Even the UI gives off an air of helplessness as your character slowly decays throughout the story. To top it all off, this game's horror is so varied it feels like a multi-editor project. It has jump scares, but they're spread out enough that even if you know they are coming, they still kind of get you, especially the sewing one. Alongside amazingly timed jump scares, there is the generally grotesque and gory horrors, such as the body mounds and monstrous beings normally found at the seaside. Then there is phobia-based horror, such as hole-covered things, a fear that leaves me genuinely ill every time I experience it, alongside the spiders and eyes and the other sorts of basic phobias. Finally, there are the human fears, that is to say stalkers, rioters, perverts and cultists, along with many others. The world is horrific. There is no getting around that, but it feels refined, handcrafted in fact, and designed to chisel away at every kind of fear you may or may not have. I haven't really discussed the gameplay loop as much as I probably should. As mentioned, you go around town completing cases, although some are location specific. For example, one is based out of a rural town festival and the other a mansion. Each investigation in the right location triggers the next phase of the case, after the completion of a normally random event. You can investigate more than needed during the quote open world unquote cases, but unless a side mission demands it or you have way too much spare stamina, doom and reason than you would ever need for the final phase, you should avoid investigating more than needed in my opinion. Now, presuming you survive the case, you will receive a key that you need to access the lighthouse, the final phase of the game. Now, I'll be honest, the lighthouse is my least favourite part of the game, and not because it is difficult. Rather, it feels pointlessly easy, as if you have levelled up even slightly, you should be able to pass enough of the lighthouse tests to win. The only times I ever lose in the lighthouse is due to doom, but if you have about 10 reason and stamina, and less than 85% doom before you enter the lighthouse, you should still be fine. As of the current build, there is no real final boss fight. I believe there is one combat encounter you get no matter what, but compared to some of the case bosses, it's a bit of a pushover, especially for a fully leveled character with a good weapon. However, to a certain degree, that doesn't really matter. The winning of this roguelike game seems a little inferior to intentionally not investigating every aspect of a case to see a different ending, even though you get less experience and probably take more damage. The cases are why you play this game, and I found myself restarting often because I didn't like, or had completed too many times, the cases being offered. I will instead look for cases with multiple endings that I haven't already seen, or new cases as they are released, such as the newly added botany case. And I guess that brings me to my main complaint with this game. The game, I will stress, is in early access. This game is far from varied. You can go multiple playthroughs without seeing something new, and this is including events. Certain cases have one ending, and others have two endings that are decided by single choices or by doing the side missions you should be doing anyway. On top of that, the quality of these cases are sporadic. While most are amazing first time and some are amazing every time, a few just never have the same effect as the Mansion Ritual or the Axeman cases, to name a couple. And apologies if any of these references don't make sense, as I'm trying to be as spoiler-free as possible. On a slightly similar note, after a while you learn what all the events give you and which responses to choose based on your stats and what you stand to lose if you fail. But this is a symptom of most decision-based and dice roll-based roguelikes and even some RPGs, so I hardly hold this against the game. I've rambled on about the art and the writing, but completely forgot about the soundtrack. It is currently at, I believe, 11 songs, with nothing being as good as the looped 35-second home track you will hear for what feels like the majority of the playthrough. To be fair, most of the soundtrack is quite memorable, though whatever number of bit music they use meshes perfectly not only with the 1 or 2-bit art style the game uses, but also generally the theme of the game. If anything, my only real issue with this game's ever-present soundtrack is that certain tracks, such as the forest and seaside unique tracks, and most of the combat tracks, are not played often enough or for long enough to truly enjoy them. And that is all I have to say. Sure, I could have gone into stats more, but they are mainly for dice rolls, and there isn't really one that's objectively better than the others. I feel items are self-explanatory as well. They boost things, sometimes at the cost of other things. Same goes for companions who have limited uses outside of boosting stats. They are parts of the game that are just there, and while important for survival, builds and unique actions, they are not really much of a talking point. So for my totally legitimate numerical score, I give this game a number 1 horror game out of my deep hatred for all other horror games. I recommend this game. It's fun and enjoyable, although unless you have a quite deep love for Cthulhu-esque horror, perhaps wait for it to be out of early access. And with that, TWIT numero whatever 2 is in Spanish is down, and once again I ask for your feedback. I've tried to include a couple more edits here and there, but using OpenShot Video Editor, because it's free, I have come to realise it's a little pernickety and prone to rendering glitches as seen at the beginning of the first TWIT, but I'll try to get round this. Finally, be sure to check out those socials I hope are on screen now, especially that Twitch one, as that's where I'm meant to stream every weekday at 6 PM British time, unless work exhausts me or I've gone out for a few drinks. And with that, I bid you a very British cheerio.